If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to dogmanencounters.com/podcast. Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. Really appreciate you listening. When it comes to being a little kid, it's so hard to get everything right, to shape a kid so that when they grow up, they're well adjusted and they don't have any major hang-ups or issues. They can function as a productive member of society. It's not easy at all, but it's so easy to have something happen that just tears that kid down so that they have all sorts of trouble functioning in life. Thank goodness tonight's guest wasn't affected that strongly by his encounters, but when you hear about one of those in particular, one that happened to him overnight when he was 11 years old and home alone when he had a pretty darn traumatic dogman encounter, to me, it's a wonder that that didn't cause all sorts of long-lasting problems. But we'll just play the glad game on that and say thank goodness. Before I bring him in here, just so you know, he wishes to remain anonymous. So with that in mind, we're going to call him Phoenix. All right, let's bring him in here now. Phoenix, thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be here, Vic.
Well, it's great having you. Phoenix, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I grew up in Mississippi, which is where the first encounter will take place. And growing up in that area, there wasn't really much to do because, we lived on a farm, basically. And it was several miles out of town. So I did a lot of hiking on our family pasture land. And as far as an adult, I've moved around quite a bit. I have lived in places like Louisiana and Missouri and Colorado, and I typically work in places like DMVs and banks, those kinds of places. But as far as any kind of outdoorsy activity, I'll go on day hikes. But I am not very fond of, especially overnight camping, very far away from a car for obvious reasons. That pretty much sums up most of what I grew up with. I did have I did have some questions growing up because of especially my great grandparents, and they would frequently tell us if we were being bad, that the Booger Bear will get you. And I had no idea what that was. So, being the curious kid I was like, what is that? What is this thing? And the only description I could ever get was it looks like a booger. And again, I'm like, what? And the description they gave, that they said it's a tall thing with hair all over it. And I was like, okay, well, what is the Booger Bear then? And they said, well, it looks like that, but it kind of also looks like a bear. And when I was a kid, my great grandmother, it was usually my cousin and I because he was adopted by her, and he and I would stay over uh, at their house quite frequently. And if we got too loud and rambunctious at night, she would sometimes just put us right outside the door to calm us down. And being the story, this having been told these things are out there, um,
Oh man.
uh, having been told that these things were out there, that was usually a really good thing to get us quiet. And I don't think she would leave us out there more than like maybe a minute or so. But one time in particular, I was the bad one, and I got put outside. And I, being scared, went and opened her car door and crawled in the back seat in the floorboard and covered up with her blanket or coat, sorry. And I remember when they came out, because I wasn't at the door, which they found unusual. um, she came out, couldn't see me, went and got my great grandfather, and they were both out looking for me. And I saw them go out around the back. They had flashlights and they were asking or talking to each other and asking, well, he wouldn't have gone far, especially in the dark. And I remember uh, them asking if they thought that any of those were around, talking amongst themselves, And at that point, I was already out of the car, and I was kind of standing at the edge of the house, but still in the light because I didn't want to go in the dark. Um, and they turned around, and I said, "I'm here." And after that, they just kind of rushed me inside. They seemed really, really concerned. Uh, I don't know if they actually had ever seen anything or not, but just based on their descriptions, it always made me wonder after I started doing some of my own research.
Wow. Everything considered, I think they did know what was out there. They had seen them before, or at least the one that paid you a visit, and that's why they were so concerned. I can understand their motivation behind telling you that the booger bear was going to get you if you didn't behave, but telling kids about a booger bear out there, that's one thing if it's jocular, but when they knew that something like that actually was out there, and unfortunately you went on to have the encounter that you had, of course, like I said before, you've had more than one encounter, but the one that you had overnight when you're home alone as a little kid, no one else in the house with you, and you had that traumatic of an experience, that traumatic of a prolonged experience, that's just horrible. That is absolutely horrible. I really wish that parents wouldn't do that. Again, I understand the motivation behind doing that. It's leverage, but there are other ways to leverage good behavior than to plant a seed like that, especially when you know that booger bears are out there, or at least one booger bear. So, yeah, not a fan of that tactic at all. I'm not. I'll tell you what, we're about 10 minutes into this, Phoenix. So, without any further ado, you've got a lot of experiences to share. Let's dive into it now. Please take your time. I know this isn't easy to talk about. You had a lot of trouble talking about this the first time we spoke, but yeah, please do take your time and just work through your experiences for us in a chronological order, if you would. And please remember,
Okay.
there's no hurry. Take your time.
Alrighty. Um, so where I think this all started from is I mentioned that I would go on these hikes, and typically I'd be out there for at least 4 to 6 hours, oftentimes longer. Um, and I had two dogs, Sasha and Shadow, the German Shepherd. Sasha was my Siberian Husky. I happened to be with Sasha that day. And typically I would, once I got far enough in the woods, I would just unleash her and she would just kind of roam around and uh, go wherever I went. Um, at this point, I'd been out there for quite a while. And I did come up from a different angle from where I usually go, which was a pond. And I always thought it was a beautiful area, especially in the fall. And I came up from this different angle, and this time I did not unleash Sasha. So I still had the leash when she stopped, and we weren't very far away from this pond. And she stopped, and I was trying to see what she was looking at because she had laser focus on something. And so I got down on my knees to see under all the spruce trees that were in the direction she was looking. I couldn't see anything. And so I pulled on her, trying to get her to come with me to the pond, and she wouldn't budge. And she let out a low growl. I'd never heard her do that before. Her fur was bristled. And I was aware that we did have cougars, we had black bears. There were even talk that there at least used to be a pack of wolves. And keep in mind that especially my older generation of family were all farmers. They know what coyotes are. And to hear them speak, these things were much larger than coyotes. So as I'm trying to get her to move, which, I mean, that wasn't unusual to just have her stop, but this with the growling was something I'd never had her do. And I couldn't see anything. And she took my hand in her mouth and started trying to pull me, like back the way we came towards the pasture. Well, I eventually decide, okay, it's time to go. She's really uncomfortable. And I did note that it was pretty quiet. I didn't really hear any birds or anything. And so I start going back the way we went, and I crossed a creek to go into the pasture. And the pasture was bordering the road. So once I walked all the way across it, I would be at the road, and that was the intended thing, since something was apparently out there. So I get to the road, or I'm crossing the pasture, sorry, and about halfway across, I hear something just moving. I wouldn't necessarily call it crashing through, but it was definitely loud, especially loud enough for me to hear it from that distance. And I didn't see anything. Sasha wanted to take off and run, so we kind of jogged to the road. And so I started walking down the road with her, and she kept looking back, and I didn't get too far down the road, and I ran into my aunt who was on her way back from my grandma's. And I told her there was something out there. I didn't feel comfortable walking, so she gave me and my doggy a ride and took us back home. And that night, I heard something, a lot of somethings, and at first I thought it was coyotes, but they didn't sound like any coyotes I'd ever heard before. To best describe it, it really sounded uh, like Animal Planet hyenas, and that's what made it so unusual for me because I knew what coyotes sounded like. I'd heard them all the time, but these didn't sound right. Eventually, I do fall asleep, and I usually had an alarm set for about 5:30 in the morning. This was, like I said, I was 11. Um, and this was about the first year that I was allowed to stay up and get myself ready in the morning. And uh, I remember waking up that morning in my bunk bed because I have a little brother and we shared a bunk bed, and I had the top bunk, and we were right next to the window. The beds were, and at this point, both my mom and stepfather would have gone at least an hour prior to take my younger siblings to the sitter and then on their way to work. So I woke up a long time before my alarm was to go off. I remember it being roughly 4:45 in the morning. And as I was laying there, I heard, excuse me, I heard this loud and deep, animalistic, heavy breathing next to my head on the other side of the window. And as I was laying there, I processed, wait a minute, this this is probably a bear, and it's right outside my window. And that made me really uncomfortable. And so I quickly and quietly as possible climbed down the ladder from the top bunk, and I went into the living room and just sat in the chair for a few seconds before I noticed that the breathing had moved and it was now at the living room window. And so, because I didn't want to draw any unnecessary attention, I went from the living room back down the hallway to my room. And as I was gathering my clothes that I'd laid out the night before, um, I heard breathing from the other window that I had, which is facing the front yard, um, along with that living room window. It was also in the front yard, but I heard it move back to the different window in my room. And at this point, I'm a little uncomfortable because it seemed to be following me. Um, and to paint a little picture, no, we didn't have curtains; they were blinds, but you can still kind of see through blinds if you look at a certain angle. But I went and put my clothes in the bathroom, and I came back out to the living room, And again, the breathing had followed me to the bathroom. I'm sorry, the living room again. And I kept moving back and forth, usually to my room, and then to the living room, just going back and forth from each end of the each end of the house. And at one point, I went into mom's room and I heard the breathing go to my front room or front window, sorry. And I was out of view of that window, but I could hear where it was coming from. And I thought maybe since I was in there, that if it couldn't see me, it would lose interest and go away. And since I was being as quiet as possible, I was hoping that it didn't hear me. Um, and about that time that I felt a little bit of relief, I heard the breathing coming from the window on the side of the house in my mom's room, which was right next to the window where it was initially at. And at that point, I go back into the living room and it just keeps following me. I don't know how long this actually went on. Went on for quite a while. At least it felt like it did. And at one point, I went back towards the bedrooms and I closed some doors, hoping to kind of draw its attention to that end of the house. And then I bumped the thermostat to cause the central unit to come on and mask any noises I would make. And I basically sprinted to one of the only two rooms in that house that had no windows, which was the utility room. And I remember going into the utility room. I pulled the door to quietly, and I could hear this thing moving around. You could hear the heavy thud of its feet. It sounded huge, and as it was moving around, I could hear these sort of like grunting growls, and I just kept hoping that it would just lose interest. And I think I was in there for at least half an hour. Um, before finally I hear these heavy padded steps come up on the concrete under the carport. Now, that utility room did have a big metal door under the carport, and then there was another one that came into the dining room, which was right next to the utility room door as well. Um, so I knew it was under the carport at this point. And as I was sitting there, I was holding my breath because I didn't want to make any sound. And I heard it move closer to the utility room door under the carport. And I hear a sound that's kind of like if your dog comes up and sniffs the door, but it was just one long sniff. And then I hear something sharp tap on that metal door 3 times. And then immediately after, what sounded like claws raking against that metal door. And I had to hold back a scream. I silently gasped. And then I just opened the utility room door, went back out through the dining room, keeping my eye on the other entrance that comes into the dining room from the carport. And I was kind of keeping an eye on that door because it does have a window on the door. It was covered, but still, given everything that had happened to that point, I was not comfortable walking by it. And then at that point, I go just at the entrance of the hallway right next to the living room. And I just kind of hide out there for a little bit. Well, I can hear this thing moving around and it sounds like it's getting more frantic. And at this point, I'm starting to get mad. um, that's just something I do. I may get scared, but sooner or later that fear turns into rage. So I opened the hall closet and I took out the rifle. I loaded the magazine. I put the mag into the gun, but I didn't load the chamber yet. And as I was approaching the door, and I don't remember if I said it or if I was thinking it, but I remember the words, um, "Leave me alone, get out." And as I was approaching the front door uh, for the front porch, I heard what sounded like a gunshot. And I stopped and made sure that, I didn't somehow misfire. I didn't see any holes in the walls or anything. So I kind of froze there for a minute, but I noticed that after a couple of minutes, I started to hear the sound of crickets and birds, whereas before they had been completely quiet. So I went and unloaded the gun, put it back in the closet, and I opened up the front door, and I noticed that I left this part out, but I noticed that my sister's bike, which had been on the front porch, and I remember hearing it being thrown. It was thrown far enough away from the house that it wasn't really technically in our yard. It was in my great grandfather's property. I mean, we didn't have like a huge front yard or anything, but it threw it that far away from the house. And for anyone wondering why I wouldn't have went for a phone, we did have a cordless one in the living room. However, it was right next to that living room window, right where her bike had been. And that's part of the reason why I didn't go for a phone. But once everything was quiet and I opened the door, I saw the bike out there. It was still dark when I opened up the door, but we did have a street light, um, and I saw that my great grandfather was already awake. So I closed and locked the door, and immediately ran over, grabbed the phone, and called him and kind of told him what happened, and he said he didn't hear anything, any gunshot or anything, and so he said, "Why don't you go ahead and finish getting ready, and then just gather your stuff for school, since I had to catch the bus for 7." Um, he said, "Just finish getting ready and call and let me know before you head over, and I'll just watch you." So at that point, I decided it'd be a good idea to, once I was ready, I went and checked on the dogs, and they were out in their houses. Shadow, I opened the door and called for him. He came out and was kind of whimpering a bit, and I talked at him for a couple of seconds, and then very reluctantly went to the edge of the carport and peeked around towards the backyard where Sasha, where her house is. And I called for her and asked her, "Are you okay, girl?" And she pokes her head out of the house and uh, gave the little husky howl, and then pulled her head back in. Well, since she wasn't coming out, that made me feel like it wasn't completely safe, but um, everybody was fine. So I went back inside, gathered my things like my backpack and stuff, and I called my great grandfather, let him know I was about to head on over, and started on my way out the door again. And he, when I got through the yard and past his muscadine vines, I could see that he was outside, standing on our side of the driveway with his old World War II rifle. And he was just kind of scanning the area behind me, towards the house, in the shed that was near our house. Um, and I walked past him, and I remember when I got close to his steps that go up to the door, um, I turned around and he was kind of walking towards me, but he was keeping focused on like the tree line, especially behind the chicken coop. And after we got inside, he offered me breakfast because I hadn't eaten yet because of all of that. And I don't really think we really much discussed anything about that beyond that point. Um, but that was the end of that encounter. And as far as anything else goes, there were a couple of oddities that happened throughout the years, but it was nothing that quite that traumatic. I mean, there were a couple of times where I would hear things out on different hikes, um, in the same property, but uh, I don't think there was really anything that was quite that traumatic.
Hey, not to interrupt you there, Phoenix, but I was listening to you recount that experience, but I never did hear you mention the shadow that you saw in your sister's window. Did you mention that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I completely forgot about that. Uh, that's what happens when you're a nervous speaker, I guess. Um, yeah, there was, during that encounter, um, before I closed the doors and bumped the thermostat for the noise, um, that street light that I mentioned that was in our front yard, while I was hiding in the hallway, I was kind of in front of her um, bedroom doorway. Her door was open, and what I saw go across just as a shadow um, was this really tall. Remember, these windows go up about 8 feet, I suppose. But I saw this thing move across the window just as a shadow, and it had this really long snout and really long pointed ears. And there were what I remember about it is there were these tufts of fur on the ears, and I remember looking at it as it passed, and the way the shadow was shaped, I was like, that whatever that is, it's on 2 feet. And that was the moment when I went and started closing the doors and um, hit the thermostat to make some noise, and then ran and hid in the utility room.
Do you want to take a
And
little break before we continue there, Phoenix? I mean, this is a lot to unload.
yeah, sure.
If you want to maybe go get some water or something, if you want to take care of anything else, I can kill time here while you do that. I guess basically reset.
Alrighty.
Wow, like I said before, Phoenix really deserves a lot of credit for mustering the courage to come on and share these experiences with us, especially the one that he just shared. Can you imagine? No one should have to go through that, especially when you're just 11. Talk about the formative years. That's right in the crux of it. Well, before he comes back after resetting, I just want to remind you that I just published 4 new episodes of Dogman Tales. That's my new Dogman podcast that I premiered last Friday night. If you go to the description for tonight's show, you should be able to find a link where you can click on it and it'll take you right to the Spreaker page for the show. That'll make it really easy to listen to. And also, now is a good time for me to let you know if you've had a Dogman encounter of your own that you need help dealing with, coming to terms with, or if you would just like to be a guest on the show, or maybe both. If you go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report, I'll be more than happy to contact you and schedule a phone consultation so I can find out how it affected you, and we can just take it from there and have a good conversation. It's a really easy process. I see a question from To Be or Not to Be. Looks like he wants to know, Vic, what do you think about the guy from Wisconsin who has photos apparently of Dogman coming through portals? Well, that's news to me. I don't know anything about that. But please remember, I'm not a researcher. I don't haunt Dogman groups on Facebook or other places. People contact me and say, hey, have you seen that picture of a Dogman that's at wherever? And I'll tell them, no, I don't frequent places like that. So no, that's all news to me. Who is this guy? If you can type a response to that, let me know. Then I guess we'll take it from there. Does anyone else have any other questions I can ask in the meantime while we're waiting for Phoenix to come back? Oh, I stand corrected. It sounds like he's back. Are you ready to continue?
I think so.
Okay, great. Well, in your own good time, please do.
All right. So The next thing that happens is when I had already left Mississippi at this point, and um, I'm living with my now ex-husband in Missouri, and this was the first winter that we lived in the house together. That was his. Prior to that, and we just lived in my apartment for the first year, basically, and then we moved to his house. And um, I remember it was pretty late at night. Um, we had an outdoor wood burning furnace, real convenient for heating the home. And this property was actually further out, I believe, in on a lake. And I remember I was heading to bed because I had to be up for work pretty early the next morning. This had to have been about 2015. And as I think I was laying there already, I just hear him scream. And I jumped out of bed. I go through the house, and I come up to the dining room window, which is right next to the furnace intake or output for the house, and I asked him what happened, what's going on, and he said there's something out here. And keep in mind, this is you know out in the woods, and so it's completely dark. You couldn't see anything. This is before we put any kind of lights up. And I go out there with a flashlight. On my way out the door, we had this big, huge metal rod um, that I would later come to call my beating stick. But I took that out with me because yeah, again, we had black bears and cougars there as well. And so I'm standing out there, and he's putting wood into the furnace, and I could hear as he would go from towards the end of the pile at the other end of the house. Um, whatever was out there was keeping pace with him as he would go towards the end of the wood pile, and then it would follow him back just in the tree line to where I couldn't see. And keep in mind, the flashlight we didn't have one of those fancy X-ray vision flashlights that we would later come to have. So I couldn't really see anything. But again, whatever it was kind of sounded like it was moving on 2 feet. And that was pretty much all that happened there. I just couldn't see anything, and it sounded strange, but again, everything was quiet. Of course, that was also winter, so there weren't any bugs, but there was just no other noise at all, which made it kind of eerie. And then after that, it was relatively quiet as far as anything happening goes until about 21, 22, when we had, well, I say we, it was me. he had gone to, I believe, a friend's house, and I was, again, alone. However, I had been sitting outside for probably a few hours at this point. I was sitting there minding my business, playing a mobile game on my phone, and while I was sitting there playing this game, I noticed it had rained, which made the footsteps more audible because I could hear the splat splat. And oh, sorry, excuse me. Let me get another sip of water real quick.
Sure, take your time.
But as I was sitting there playing my little game, I heard these footsteps. Now, these footsteps were coming from the back of the house, which was towards the woods, or coming from the woods. And I noticed that it seemed to have a really long stride because they were moving quickly, but it sounded very much like it was moving on 2 feet. And then I heard it walk past me on the front porch. It went down the hill and across the road. I heard crunch. And then I heard the dumpster lid open, and then it closed. We hadn't put the trash out yet. And I think that's why I think that may have been, whatever it was, may have been looking for something to eat, because that wouldn't have been a person. This was in one of the colder months, and nobody would have been there. And at this point, I'm really paying attention because that was strange. And I hear it take 2 steps across the road, which is, again, gravel. And it starts coming up the hill, and it stops directly parallel with me. And I hear that eerily similar to what I heard all those years ago, that same deep, heavy, animalistic breathing. And I got up, trying not to look in its direction, still kind of trying to look at it to see if I could see what it was. But it was our street lamp. The light from it was blocked by this big cedar tree that we have basically right next to the porch. So I couldn't see anything as far as light goes. That part of the yard was completely in the dark. Now, to give some info, the way the land is around that house is the front of the house comes up higher off of the ground than going towards the back. So this front porch that I was on was not quite 6 feet off the ground, and I'm about 5'8". So when I stood up and I could see these glowing eyes, they were kind of a greenish blue with like a yellow hue towards the bottom of them. And whatever this thing was, was really close to eye level with me from where it was standing. And other than the eyes, there were all I could see was the silhouette, because there was a light source further down down the road behind it, from one of the neighbors. And all I could see were these really long pointed ears, which kind of reminded me of that shadow that had moved across my window. I gathered the stuff that I had brought out there to our little table on the porch, and just trying to not pay as much attention to it as possible, and just quickly went inside. And I called after I got inside. I called my ex and told him what happened, and that I'm not sure what that was, but I felt terrified. So he asked if I was going to call the sheriff department and see if I could have someone come out. And I said, yeah, I think I'll do that, because that just made me really uneasy, especially given the experience I had years ago. And that's what reminded me of that experience, was the breathing. And I just remember I kind of felt that same like primal fear that I had when I was a kid from that. And I called the sheriff's department out there. They got out there. They walked around the property. We lived on it was right next to a campground, and which his family owned. And we walked around the cabin where the campgrounds were, and around the store. He even walked up around the house just to make sure, there wasn't anyone or whatever there. I followed him to a certain point, but while I was following him, I was looking to see if there were any kind of prints. I didn't see any. I did check the next day when it was light, but I don't recall seeing much of anything. It was very grassy. It was not extremely wet, but there wasn't any like mud where I could see any kind of clear indication anything had walked through there. But after he left, I had been feeling a little more calm, and I don't know if I could kind of sense that it was there or what, but maybe about half an hour after he was gone, I just got this intense feeling of, I guess I could call it dread. The fear was returning, and I'm not sure if the fact that the curtains in the dining room were just lace curtains, you could see through those, or not, but I felt really uneasy, and I remember I felt so uneasy that I went and loaded the shotgun with the 3-inch Magnum rounds, and I took it upstairs with me to the office, and that is where I slept, in the office chair with the loaded shotgun right next to me. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So that you know, when you're all done telling us about this encounter, we're almost an hour in, and I know you've got more experiences to share, including the time where you actually had the sighting of a dogman there. After you finish this particular encounter, please go ahead and stop, and we'll just have you come back on for a part two.
Okay. Um, well, um, that was pretty much the end of that one. I, like I said, fell asleep in that office chair with the shotgun laying right next to me. And as far as that one was done. I mean, there were some other minor things that happened, but that was pretty much the end of that encounter.
Well, thank goodness that was the end of it. Yeah, you've been through enough. You really have. Sometimes it's best to know when to pull up stakes and head out. And after sharing those two experiences with us tonight, especially looking at the time, we're an hour in now, let's just go ahead and stop it here for tonight. And you've already agreed before we started the show to come back for a part two to share the other experiences that you didn't have time to share tonight, and also do a Q&A. I'll have a lot of questions for you, and I know the listeners will as well. So if you're sure that you're okay with doing that, with coming back for a part two, then let's just do it that way then.
Alrighty.
Okay, great. And yeah, sounds to me like you could really use a break anyway. So definitely the best way to handle it. Well, yeah, let's just go ahead and stop it here. That's what we'll do then. We'll stop it here and bring you back on. For everyone listening, I don't know what night part two is going to air. There's a strong possibility it's not going to air until next Friday night, but I'll get together with Phoenix here. We'll put our heads together and get that all worked out. And once we do know when we're going to record it, it'll be a live stream as well, just like tonight's show was. I'll put the word out so you know when to expect it. But before we get out of here, Phoenix, do you have any closing comments you'd like to put out there for us?
As far as these encounters, if I guess if you've have something happen like what I had, I especially with that second encounter, I would say to try to ignore it, pretend you don't see it, don't acknowledge it, and just go somewhere safe inside. Do not stay outside.
Well, that's really good advice. Have you been studying these guys? Because, yeah, that advice is just about as good as it comes.
After that second encounter, that's actually what prompted me to start studying them. And that's how I stumbled across your show. And so I've been listening to a lot of your older shows. I haven't quite caught up with it. I don't think I've even caught halfway up with what you've done so far. But there was one Dogman website for some guys. I think they were out in Pulaski County, Missouri, that I had originally joined and just researched through various other sources as well, because I know that whatever that wasn't normal, even though for years, yeah, I did try and tell myself it was a bear, or maybe it was some creep who was just trying to scare me. But like I told you the other day, the sounds that were made, I can do some weird things with my voice, but I could not replicate that.
Oh, no, I believe it. There's only so much you can do. So, yeah, that does make sense. Well, Phoenix, like I said, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing those experiences with us. Of course, you have more to share. So when we do part two, we'll just bring you back on and have you do it then and answer some questions, do a Q&A. But having said that, thanks again so much for your time here tonight, and I guess I'll talk to you soon.
Alrighty.
Thanks. We'll see ya.
Thanks.
That's it for tonight's show. And so that you know, whether you listen to the podcast version of the show or if you use YouTube to listen to this show, once I do nail down a time for part 2 to air, I'll post announcements in both media ways, in both YouTube and also podcast format, to let you know when to expect that part 2 to air. But having said that, as always, everyone, thanks so much for listening in. Hope you have a great night.